Hello, this is Shan Chandrasekhar welcoming you to another delightful part of our show, The Achievers. As part of the Achievers series, we featured some of the finest of highly accomplished people from around the world. We are very proud to feature an extraordinary gentleman who has made a great contribution at such a young age in Canada. He is the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of Canada, none other than Honourable Gary Anandasangaree. Gary, what a pleasure to see you again. Welcome to ATN.
Thank you, Dr. Chandrasekhar. It's such a pleasure to be back. I feel very much at home. I've been an enormous fan of yours and Mrs. Chandrasekhar for many decades, so I'm just honored to be here with you.
We've admired you right from your early days. You're an extraordinary lawyer committed to human rights issues, and you're known for your ethics, your integrity, and your principles.
The dream, the only thing I ever wanted to be was a lawyer. I think that was the one aim I had in my life, and I took a fairly long route to become a lawyer. And from that time, things happened almost naturally and progressively. So I was elected in 2015. In that time, the riding of Scarborough Rouge Park, and I was re-elected twice, and now I'm running for the third time now. It's been truly humbling to serve Canadians of all backgrounds, and the work that I'm doing now, particularly on reconciliation since 2023, as a Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations and then Northern Affairs, has really amplified for me what Canada's potential can really be.
What is the difference in role between being the Minister of Justice and the role as the Attorney General of this country?
That's a very, very good question, because oftentimes people are confused. When I'm the Minister of Justice, I serve in cabinet and I bring forward policies and changes to law that cabinet approves, and then it goes to Parliament where Parliament approves. The role of Minister of Attorney General is somewhat unique in Canadian law because it essentially bestows upon me certain responsibilities that is just unique to me as Attorney General, which includes issues of extradition. So when there's an extradition proceeding in place, the final step on the extradition is for me to approve as Attorney General that extradition, which has potentially life-changing impacts on the individual who may be extradited to a country. So it's a very unique role and one that is outside of the political framework, and the decision itself is very much centered on the law that I am charged to protect. The moment in history right now in Canada is where, April 17th will be marking the 40th anniversary of the Section 15 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which essentially recognizes men and women as equal. The protection of the Charter, the protection of the rule of law, the protection of the Canadian Constitution are the major areas that I am charged to protect and to ensure that Canada remains a rule of law country, and any dithering of that basic principle is something that I need to fiercely protect, regardless of what the issue is. So it's a very I feel quite responsible. It is a very significant responsibility tasked by Prime Minister Carney, but one that I know that many, especially in the South Asian diaspora, are concerned about, because as I speak to communities across Canada, and I've had the pleasure of meeting and going to mosques, gurdwaras, and temples, and I see the fears, I see the anxiety that people have, especially when issues have been settled for many years. Issues around equality, issues around very basic things as our ability to practice our faith, or our ability to associate. And when those are challenged, then we need to have the legal system that is ready to defend those liberties.
The major concern in Canada for most Canadians right now Of course, basic standard of living, the economy, the opportunities for employment, the stability for employment, and of course, enormous problem with respect to increase in crime. Violent crimes, domestic violence is something that's slightly different because that belongs to the mental illness side of it, and it is being treated as much as possible. But there is general armed robberies, auto thefts, carjackings, but violent carjackings, all those kind of things are becoming higher and higher in such a peaceful country like Canada, where many years ago, I remember we could be home just leaving the doors open, and people are afraid. They can't even do that anymore. It's an extremely important aspect of your jurisdiction as the Attorney General. Do you think that when the new government is formed now, that you will be taking a tighter look at crime prevention? Because you used to be on the Police Chiefs Advisory Board, so you've got the direct experience there as well. So would that be something that you would be doing? And as a corollary to that would be a natural extension is that there's a tremendous amount of illegal IPTV piracy, which is killing the entire broadcast industry, film industry in Canada. We could lose a huge number, about 150,000 jobs. And that's a very simple little thing, basically, in terms of changing the legislation from a civil offense to a criminal offense. European Common Union has already done it. England has done it. A few other countries have done it. And they've all introduced site blocking regimes, and they've introduced stronger tools in terms of legislations. Do you think that Canada would at least adapt that and make an attempt to do that in all these areas of fighting crime?
Let me just answer your second question with respect to issues around broadcasting and illegal use of not just ATN, but many other networks, artistic and copyright material by illegal actors. This is absolutely wrong, and one that I will commit to working with you on and the industry on to ensure that there's adequate penalties and compensation for those who are impacted, and that's something that I do look forward to engaging with you at a later date.
Wonderful, wonderful.
With respect to the broader issues around crime, there is, since COVID, we've had a number of challenges. One of them is obviously addictions and mental health, especially with young people. We see quite an increase in mental health issues, and we saw that immediately after COVID, and some of it continues to persist. And we have been supporting young people through mental health supports, but we need to do more, and we fully realize the work that needs to be done, and it needs to be collaborative with the provinces as well as the municipalities. The overall issue of crime, the penalties themselves exist in law. If you look at anyone who's committing a serious crime, the penalties are available for those who commit those crimes, and they include jail time, they include increased level of incarceration. One of the things that we're unable to do is we have no control over how provinces administer their bail system. Even though the law itself is undertaken by the federal government through the criminal code, the issuance of bail is primarily through what's called justice of the peace, as well as the courts in, for example, Ontario. There was a recent article in the Toronto Star about the jail in Milton in terms of overcrowding. So if somebody is repeatedly committing crimes, it is really up to the province and their judges to be able to detain them. And if the facilities are not there in Ontario, then they get released. And that's one of the challenges we faced. And one of the things that I want to do right after the election is to be able to meet with our counterparts to see how we can streamline this, how we could work in more collaboration to ensure that if there's repeat violent offenders, there's a mechanism to ensure that facilities are available, and the resources, including training, is available for those to be dealt with accordingly. There is a difference in terms of our approach to crime. The other parties, one of the parties believes that mandatory minimum penalties are the answer to crimes. And we know that in the United States, you see an over-incarceration of Black Americans in the jail system for issues such as simple possession of some certain drugs. We know in Canada there's an over-incarceration of Indigenous people within the criminal justice system. In some cases, because of issues around housing, issues around other social gaps that exist within certain communities. And we don't believe that's the answer. We believe that every single person who commits a crime deserves to go in front of a judge, and the judge, based on the individual attributes, their personal circumstances, need to make the decision on what the sentence should be. It should not be prescribed by Parliament to say X equals 3 years mandatory penalty. For us, we believe X equals, based on what the judge believes, could be a 4-year or 5-year sentence. And that's the fundamental difference in thinking. And over time, it doesn't help us when we have a particular community, in this case, Indigenous or Black Canadians, being overly incarcerated. That's not the answer. The answer is what we were talking about earlier. We need to have programs, we need to have community-driven initiatives that can enable off-ramps to take place. So while we are seeing car thefts as an example, because we're working together with the police, with the province, and with the federal government, we're seeing car thefts actually going down year over year. And I'm very confident that trend will continue. And I will work with our partners in the province and municipalities, as well as policing, to ensure that these issues are addressed.
Now, it gives room for a judicial discrepancy across the country. That's where the problem comes. I do also believe that people can change for the better. But the cost of imprisonment, trial and arrest and incarceration is quite expensive to the taxpayer and to the government as well. We realize that. But a repeat offender who's been there, already charged over and over, the bail conditions, should that not be much stricter? And also for violent crimes, it really frightens everybody out in terms of...
Look, to be very clear, violent offenders will get sentences that are commensurate with the level of violence, when a judge looks at their case, right? There's no question that people should be sentenced for that, and I believe that the judges that we have appointed in the federal, in superior courts in Ontario, for example, have absolute discretion and have the ability to be able to sentence those towards jail if that's the punishment required. In terms of repeat offenders getting bail, this is where I think the province needs to step up. There is a need for, if you are a repeat offender, you go in front of a justice of the peace. The justice of the peace is appointed by the province, who is not a lawyer, who may not have the right training, but they also don't have the resources. So they may not have space in jail and detention holding centers to be able to send them to detention, so they're set free. But ultimately, the issues of bail, reverse onus, we have increased reverse onus provisions, which means that the presumption of bail as a right is turned around, and you have to demonstrate in a hearing that you do not pose a risk to society. But when that happens, oftentimes people are released because there's not enough space in detention centers. So these are resource issues that we need to sort out with the provinces, and my commitment is to work towards that. But let me be very clear, in terms of people who are committing violent crimes, should definitely face the consequences that are appropriate in those circumstances. Nobody should be walking away from violent criminal activity.
You're very highly qualified. You got your bachelor's degree with an honors from Carleton, and you got your law degree from one of the most prestigious institutions, Osgoode Hall Law School. I want to rewind and go back way before that. You were born in Sri Lanka, and your father was a very well-known, prominent politician from the Tamil community, and he was a pioneer. Tell me about your childhood days and what you were exposed to. Because I know at the age of 10, you were in Dublin in Ireland, and that was a different experience. We'll talk about that later. But first, tell me about your upbringing in Sri Lanka.
Sure. I grew up in what is often known as a Tamil nationalist household, where politics was very much part of the daily life. But I think for me, one of the major moments in my life was the 1979 riots, when I had family members who were deeply impacted, and that's when I think my first memories of what was happening to the Tamil community.
Black July.
This is prior to Black July. This is one of the earlier moments. And then I saw people who were displaced, who came from Colombo to Jaffna, and who basically had lost everything. So the consciousness of of this identity, the importance of a language, the importance of a people, became very ingrained in my life and my psyche, and something that I continue to hold to this day. And as in 1980, my mother and I went to Ireland. My mom was studying, and we were ready to go back to Sri Lanka in July 31st, 1983. We were ready to go back, but of course the riots, the pogroms happened, and we weren't able to go. And at that point, I recall we were in Dublin, and I was 10 years old. We were doing the first protest in Dublin in front of the Indian Embassy, of all places, the Indian Embassy, because India was very much a very strong understanding of what was happening on the island of Sri Lanka, and I was able to, I guess, get involved politically, and to be able to involve myself in the first of many protests that I would go on to organize. But from that point onwards, I understood the value of organizing, right? The value of coming together, the value of community, and I've used that many times over in my life as a student leader here in Canada, as someone who's been very much part of many other struggle for rights, because the fundamentals are the same, right? It's about bringing attention to an issue, but also being able to, the value of having a seat at the table. And this is one of the overarching principles of my political journey, is about having a seat at the table where decisions are made. And when you are at that table, it's not about one decision. It's not about the issue that I grew up with most of my life, which is on Tamil rights. It is about Indigenous rights. It's about what is the role of the state vis-a-vis religious freedoms and protection of religious minorities. What is the role of a state vis-a-vis refugees or newcomers or immigrants? So when you have that seat at the table, you bring your entire worldview into that seat, and it is, we're not just one, siloed individual. We're multifaceted, right? And that to me is where both the responsibility lies on issues that I don't know about, that I need to advocate for. So, as an example, when I ran in 2015, if you'd asked me, how important is the environment in terms of the work you're going to do, I would have probably said it's not a top priority for me. It is a priority for our government, it's a priority for our party, but it wasn't the issue that I would champion. But over the last 10 years, what I've found is that it is the existential threat that we face. And as a result, if I don't address it as an elected official who has a seat at the table and lately as a seat in cabinet, then I would have failed, myself, and I would have failed my constituents. So you almost have to understand and continuously challenge yourself as to, what is important, what is the impact of the decisions we make on society.
As a 10-year-old boy, here is a young man landing here in Canada. So what went through your mind, your first impressions of this country when you landed here?
I landed in Montreal on August 31st, 1983.
You were 10 years old.
I was 10 years old. We came on a CP flight, and we were landing at Mirabel International Airport. And I just remember, I I didn't know what we were getting into. I spoke, I was fluent in English, I was fluent, reading, writing. And when we started school in Montreal, it was a challenge because I had to learn French, and I just felt out of place. In 1984, moved to Toronto, and then I went to school here. I had a fairly, normal life. One thing people don't know is in grade 11, I ended up, dropping out of high school, and that's something that most people may not know. But it was part of my journey, and I was able to finish school on my own. And because sometimes high school, the traditional model doesn't work, and I felt it didn't work for me. And then I went on to university at Carleton, and then on to Osgoode Hall later on. But one thing that I was always determined to do was to become a lawyer, and that never, any obstacles along the way, that never deterred me from that particular objective.
You were very successful and very effective as an elected member of Parliament, and also during your tenure as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage in terms of developing strategy for race relations. Tell us about that.
So my first portfolio was when I was serving as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Heritage, and there's three major things that we were able to do during that time. First was developing Canada's first anti-racism strategy, which was released in 2019, brought together many elements of government to address the issues of systemic racism. As you know, systemic racism particularly, is multifaceted, and there's no panacea, there's no simple solution. It requires in part education, in part changes to laws, but also programs that will enable communities to be able to educate, and also to secure themselves against discrimination. And the moment in time we're in right now really does poses the question to us in terms of the type of society we want, and the type of society we're living in, and the type of world in which racialized people continue to struggle, but also to thrive. And to me, that was a very important element of what the government ought to do. Government is not one that should interfere, but it should facilitate discussions and open dialogue. And I believe the first National Anti-Racism Strategy did that. Then the second major tranche of the work was around developing Indigenous languages legislation, Bill C-91. And this is something that over time, according to UNESCO, 75% of Indigenous languages in Canada were or are in the cusp of being lost. Before contact, we had upwards of 100 languages that were spoken here. Now you go to any Indigenous communities, we know that language is really a difficult component of their life because they have lost it. And we can all relate as those, those of us who speak another language at home, we can relate to the importance of language, which is so intertwined with our culture and our way of life. And we see that so many languages were at the cusp of being lost, and the Indigenous languages legislation really does put some light into protection of the languages through an Indigenous Languages Commissioner, and then enables languages to be both preserved but also becoming regularized use in day-to-day life. The third aspect was to address the issue of inclusion, right? Making sure that notwithstanding your background, notwithstanding your cultural background, you are Canadian, that there is this holistic Canadian identity that looks at our differences as a source of strength and not as a source of weakness. And we were able to do that. So that, when I started off as Parliamentary Secretary, was a huge task, and I felt very passionate about three of the major things that we did. I would say quite successfully, as a very important contribution to my role in addition to my role as a member of parliament.
You contributed a great deal to the youth movement, especially you were the chair of the Canadian Tamil Youth Association group. We had a lot of concrete steps that you wanted to take in terms of changing some steps and being, certain injustice being done to unequal treatment of the youth for that matter, expelling from school for unjust cause for that matter. So can you explain that?
Sure. There was a time in the late 90s, early 2000s, where there was a increased level of violence involving young Tamil men, particularly, many of them who came by themselves without their parents, or they came as unaccompanied minors. And we saw this intersection between the criminal justice system as well as those young people who were often kicked out of school because the school just wasn't able to handle it, and the young people were not able to integrate properly into the school system. So at that time, a number of young people came together. This was 25 years ago, last year, came together and started this organization called Cantide, and I came into it about a year after it was started. But what was key to me was that community-driven solutions are the best way to solve problems. It cannot be, government has a supporting role, the overall broader communities and agencies have supporting responsibilities, but ultimately it is the community that needs to take ownership of its issues and try to resolve it. And that was my big learning experience there, to ensure that, if somebody's getting kicked out of school, well, you're actually giving them a sentence that is far harsher than sending them to jail, because you're depriving that person of an education. And that is so fundamental, because we know that education is the ultimate equalizer in society, and that is one of the major drivers that enable young people to become, who they are as adults. It's not exclusively that, but it is an important indicator of and support mechanism for someone to overcome many adversity. I mean, I'm probably one example of that, where education was a critical driver in the work that I've been able to do. And the fact that you can go and say, look, I'm a lawyer, I'm doing this type of advocacy, does embolden you and does give you a level of access and respect that you may not have otherwise. So to drive these young people into education, keep them in school, and many of them I see still today who are extremely successful, and who realize that as young people we all make mistakes, and they have been given a second chance, and sometimes they come back and contribute way more than anyone expected of them, and they continue to be good human beings with good contributions to society. So from the time I was right out of university to now, I always believe that people need second chances, that people, you cannot just put away people or just get rid of them. The problem doesn't go away. Countries need to invest in young people, and that's something I take with me today, especially as in my role as Minister of Justice and Attorney General, is to understand that our criminal justice system is one where those who commit serious offenses will face serious consequences, but those who have a potential to redeem and build a better life should be given that opportunity.
That's fantastic. You also wet your feet with some work experience as well in the field of real estate. So you had a realistic touch about what was really going on in the housing market with the new immigrants coming in. You had a chance to see that. Tell me about that experience as to how that helped you later when you became the president of the Canada Tamil Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah, that was a very interesting time because I had just also started my law office. So this was in 2007, 2008 to 2009. And I became the president of the chamber. I started law practice 2 years earlier. I had a lot of major clients who were lenders. And all of a sudden in 2008, what I saw was things were shutting down, right? So companies that had started off, opened and got financing for were already shutting their doors. They weren't able to survive because of the uncertainty of the overall world financial markets. And soon I realized, especially at the chamber, we saw a lot of businesses who were struggling and going through this financial crisis. And we needed to basically support these enterprises, those entrepreneurs who took the risk to oftentimes put up their properties for sale. On a personal level, having opened a law office, having hired a bunch of staff, I was struggling to make payroll, right? And many in 2008 will relate to that, because we were all trying to figure out what was going on in the world. And those 6-9 months were amongst the most difficult in my life. From a financial perspective, we all went through it
during that
but
period.
ultimately it was about keeping people employed, keeping our staff loyal to us, because the easiest thing to do was not have those staff, but the longer term loss of that would be far greater than the immediate challenges we face. So maneuvering that at relatively early in my career, I think put a lot of perspective in my life, gave me a lot of perspective, especially as we talk about the challenges that I know many businesses are going through today with the impending tariffs. I met just earlier today with some people who own factories and who are doing work sharing right now, and who are trying to make sure that their staff don't leave them, and really trying to empathize, and from a decision-making process, and where I do have a seat at the table, is to be able to convey that and say, these folks are really struggling right now, and we as government need to support them. They're not looking for a handout. They're not looking for any type of monetary support. What they want is a bridge to get them to the other, to the end of this crisis, however long it lasts, so they can continue their business.
At university, you had this Gold Key Award, which is a very prestigious award from Osgoode Hall Law School. And you were in private practice as well. Plus, you had the experience as an entrepreneur in real estate, other related fields. What got you involved in politics, and what attracted you towards the Liberal Party?
Politics is something that I never thought I would actually get into, but in 2009, with the end of the armed conflict in Sri Lanka, there was enormous challenges I think the Tamil community faced. It was not seen as relevant within the Canadian political space, and we ended up having to demonstrate. As you know, there was a number of demonstrations. I was supporting, from a legal perspective, people's right to demonstrate and to voice their concerns. And in the height of 2009 is when I met Justin Trudeau. And we kept in touch after that. So during his leadership, I helped him. And in 2013, after he became leader, we had some conversations, and he said, look, I'd like you to run, but you have to win the nomination. Like, that's the condition, but I will make sure that, you have a fair chance. And that's what happened. I ended up running in 2014 is when I was nominated, and 2015 was the election. And it goes back to the notion of having a seat at the table. That's something that I really believed, and the seat at the table was not for me as Gary Anandasangaree, it's for me as a Tamil Canadian, as me as a racialized person, for me as a lawyer, for me as someone who's worked with youth, for me as someone who believed in equality. So for all of the different areas that I worked in, that seat was for that space, to make sure that those rights, those issues were represented through me. And of course, as time went, I added, the Rouge National Park became a very important part of the work that I did. Protection of green spaces, protection of our environment became deeply important. And then as an MP, one of the major things that I put myself to work towards was on reconciliation. Because Canada, as a great country as it is still unresolved for Indigenous people. And far too often, based on any major matrix of social cohesion or understanding of equality, Indigenous people were far behind. Anything from clean drinking water to housing to self-determination, they do not still have the same levels of success as other Canadians. So it was an area that was particularly important to me, and I put a lot of effort into understanding, to building relationships, and to working towards passage of laws, including Indigenous Languages Act, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is now September 30th. And of course, the one that I'm particularly proud of is the implementation of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or UNDRIP as it's called. And I was able to work in partnership with Indigenous leaders across the country to be able to make sure that we are going towards the right direction. And of course, Prime Minister Trudeau, one of his major legacies and one of his major areas of interest was to ensure that we are on the right path of reconciliation. It is an intergenerational effort. It is one that's going to take multi-generations to achieve. But I feel that we are on the right track, and we've made many areas we have progressed on. But it is for every government from now on to be able to commit to reconciliation. So we cannot just have this, 4 years of the Liberal government and then, 4 years of the other government going backwards. It needs to be a continuous journey. As for why I'm a Liberal, I was not always a Liberal. There was times I was on the orange side, but at the end of the day, for me, the Liberal Party gives me the right balance. So it believes in individual liberties. It believes in collective freedoms. It believes in the market with a very strong social support. So it is the culmination of all of this that's attracted me to the Liberal Party, but also the leaders that we've had, whether it's Prime Minister Chrétien, Prime Minister Martin, Prime Minister Trudeau, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, or Justin Trudeau, or now Mark Carney. It's the leaders that have inspired me, and now I'm very inspired by Prime Minister Carney, because I think he is here for the moment, and he has worked his entire life towards this moment, and I'm quite excited that he's here.
Your swearing-in ceremony took place in the year 2023. That's the first time where you chose Tirukkural. So tell me about that particular aspect, to what gave you that incentive to do that.
So I was sworn in. The night before my swearing in, I met with Prime Minister Trudeau, right, as well as the Clerk of the Privy Council and Prime Minister's Chief of Staff. So he offered me, he asked me to serve in his cabinet as Minister of Crown-Indigenous Relations. And right after that, they kind of send you to another room, and this was at his house. This was at his Rideau Cottage. So we went to another room, which was more of a basement, and one of the members from the Privy Council office kind of goes through the process. They will, they tell you, okay, you need to come through this door. These are the instructions. This is who you can invite. And then they ask you, so how do you want to be sworn in? Do you want to affirm your oath, or do you want to use a holy book? And I said, I prefer to use the Tirukkural. And he was a little stunned, and he basically tried to repeat it. He said, what do you call it? I said, Tirukkural. And I said, oh, Tirukkural? Okay. And then he wrote it down. As for the spelling, wrote it down. So this was 6 p.m. and the swearing in was like in the morning at around 11 or 12. And then he was not sure if you can provide the book. And I didn't have one on me. This was in Ottawa. So I was struggling with this, and then he said, look, give me some time. I'll call you back. And he called me around 9 o'clock and said, he's truly excited. He said, oh, I found the book. It was at the bookstore, and I bought some copies, and he basically gave it to me on the day of the swearing in. Of course, it was hugely significant because I am, even though I'm of Hindu faith, the one thing that overrides my faith is my language, and the struggle of Tamil identity for Tamils around the world, because Tamils are an international force with very little representation, and I felt a need to project that as I took oath, because I'm not taking it just for myself, I'm taking it on behalf of all of us. The path that you created, the path that my father-in-law created, the path that my wife has created, the young people that are here, I want them to be proud of who they are. And that's the reason I was able to that's the reason I chose the book, and that's the reason why I think now in history this will no longer be new for someone who wants to swear the oath to the Tirukkural.
You have two lovely children, two daughters, and they're both named after two beautiful ragas of Carnatic and Hindustani music, Bhairavi and Sahana. So tell me about them.
So my wife and I have no artistic talent whatsoever. So we thought, okay, maybe naming them will give them some artistic talent, and it hasn't. So they're not singers or musicians by any chance, but they are remarkable young people, and they're truly inspirational. Truly, they push me, right? They push Harini, they push us to do better, and they always remind us of what's important. So it's oftentimes people ask about our like even language, right? One of the things that I struggle with the kids is the ability to speak Tamil, right? Which is something that's quite important to me. One of the things my father-in-law said maybe about 2 weeks before he passed, I asked him, what is your one regret in life? And he said his one regret was that his kids didn't speak Tamil, which was very difficult for me to understand, but I understand it now more, because language is so important to him, and language is so important to all of us, and there is a sense of pride and authenticity that comes with understanding and speaking the language. I myself have gone through a journey of trying to understand more. I could never read or write, but the pandemic allowed me to learn to read, and I took these lessons 1 hour a day for almost like 2 months during the pandemic, first 2 months of pandemic, to learn to read. So it's a lifelong journey towards embracing one's culture and language, especially in a multicultural country like Canada.
You're multilingual, so I want you to say something in English first, and then I want you to say something in French, and of course something in Tamil.
Just take a moment to thank you, Dr. Shan, for this opportunity. You have been an incredible friend and mentor, and someone I've looked up to most of my life. You and Jaya, you have been trailblazers in this country. You have, through the work that you've done for over 50 years, brought Canadians of all stripes together, particularly within the South Asian community, but you also have worked outside to highlight this community as it grew from infancy to what it is today. Bonjour tout le monde, merci pour aujourd'hui. C'était un grand plaisir pour moi avec Dr. Shan. Ungal முயற்சி, உங்கள் துணைவியாரின் முயற்சி வந்து மிகவும் நாங்கள் தமிழ் மக்கள் முழு பெரும் மிகவும் பெருமைப்படுவோம். நீங்கள் வந்து கனடாவில் வந்து பல கலாச்சார மக்களை ஒன்று சேர்த்து உங்கள் நெட்வொர்க், ஏஷியன் டெலிவிஷன் நெட்வொர்க்குகளால் எங்கள் கலாச்சாரத்தை நீங்கள் வெளியில் கொண்டு வந்து பல கலைஞர்களை நீங்கள் இந்த நாட்டுக்கு நீங்கள் முதல் தடவையாக நீங்கள் இன்ட்ரடியூஸ் பண்ணி இன்றும் நீங்கள் கிட்டத்தட்ட 55 வருடமாக உங்கள் சேவைகளை கனடாவில் நீங்கள் செஞ்சு கொண்டு வாரீர்கள். அதுக்கு கனடா பெருமைப்பட வேணும். நீங்கள் வந்து எனக்கு மட்டுமில்லை பல பேருக்கு நீங்கள் ஒரு முக்கியமான ஒரு ரோல் மாடலாக இருக்கிறீர்கள். அதனுடைய உங்களுக்கும் உங்கள் மிஸ்ஸஸ் சந்திரசேகருக்கும் என் நன்றிகள், என் வாழ்த்துக்கள். நேர்கள் முழு பேருக்கும் என் வாழ்த்துக்கள். நன்றி.
Gary, I wanted to wish you all the best. May God bless you and keep up the fantastic work that you're doing. Your integrity has been impeccable.
Thank you, Dr. Shan.